Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Child Anxiety Fact Podcast. My name is Dawn Friedman, and I'm the owner of Child Anxiety Support, a membership for parents of anxious kids. I have my master's in clinical counseling and additional postgraduate training in child anxiety disorders, including exposure and response prevention and the Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions program, or SPACE program, which was designed by Dr. Ellie Lebowitz of the Yale Child Study Center. I'm also certified in infant-toddler mental health. FACT stands for Frequently Asked Questions, and each week I'll be answering your questions about childhood and teen anxiety. Let's get started. The question this week is a big one, and it's specific. Should I homeschool my child because of their social anxiety? I've also heard this question as, should I homeschool my child because of their separation anxiety? And these are the same question. For one thing, separation anxiety in young children, if left untreated, tends to turn into social anxiety in older children and teens. In either case, though, my answer is going to be the same. And before I give you that answer, I want you to know that my husband and I homeschooled both our kids. Our son, who is now an adult, went all the way through as a homeschooler until what is technically graduation. And our daughter, who is going to graduate from actual school this spring, decided to drop into school starting in 7th grade. In other words, I'm a fan of homeschooling. We loved homeschooling, and I know that it can be a great fit for lots of families. That said, people should homeschool because they want to homeschool. If you want to homeschool your kids, go for it. But if you're considering it because your child is struggling in school and you're feeling like you don't know what else to do, then let's stop for a minute and consider that situation. If you're thinking about homeschooling because your child is struggling with social anxiety or separation anxiety, let me tell you that homeschooling is not going to cure that. In fact, it might make it worse. At least you're going to have to plan for ways for them to confront their social anxiety and separate from you in other ways, because just pulling them from school is not addressing the central issue of their anxiety. Anxiety drives avoidance, and anxiety disorders are diagnosed when that avoidance gets so bad that the child is no longer functioning. By definition, a child who is homeschooling to avoid social interaction or separating from caregivers is suffering from an anxiety disorder, because that's the criteria. A child who is not functioning and going to school and connecting with other people is part of what it means to function as a child. Our goal as parents needs to push for our children's lives to get bigger and more expansive as they grow. We want them to become more independent and better able to function without our help, and our decision-making needs to remember that. It's not just about coping in the here and now. That's part of it too, but it's also about how they will cope in the future when we are no longer there to assist them. Pulling a child who is socially anxious out of school or letting them stay home because they're afraid to be away from us may make them feel better in the short term, but we need to consider how that's going to benefit them in the long term. Again, I'm a big fan of homeschooling, and if a family decides it will be easier to handle the anxiety by homeschooling and creating different kinds of opportunities, then that's fine. But if the plan is that the child will come home and not have to deal with peers or friends or other adults, then that's not going to serve them well. I have met families who have decided to homeschool temporarily, hoping their child will grow out of their anxiety, but without a plan to confront the anxiety, this doesn't work. And in fact, the anxiety gets worse or starts showing up in other areas of their lives. If your child's anxiety is severe enough that you are thinking about homeschooling, then I encourage you to reach out to a therapist. It means things have gotten pretty serious. You'll want a therapist who understands the value of homeschooling if you want to keep that on the table, who isn't just going to knee-jerk tell you that it's bad for kids, because of course that's not necessarily true. But you need one who can help you figure out if what you're offering is an accommodation or a support. An accommodation is something that sinks your child more deeply in their anxiety, and a support is something that's meant to help them grow out of it. But it's not always easy to tell the difference, especially when we're in it with our kids. And oftentimes we need an outsider who understands anxiety and anxiety treatment to help us come up with ways to lift the child out of their anxiety. The right therapist can also help you figure out whether or not your child's anxiety is caused by a poor fit educational environment that can be changed in ways to make it more appropriate for your child. Anxiety often shows up with other diagnoses like ADHD, learning disabilities, giftedness, and autism spectrum disorders. Those things need to be appropriately diagnosed and addressed. If they're not, then of course that's not going to be a good environment for your child, and we shouldn't be surprised if the result is school refusal. If you are in the United States and your child has a formal anxiety diagnosis or one of those other diagnoses, then they may be eligible for a 504 plan or an IEP or individualized education plan. 504s are a plan for how schools will support children with a diagnosed disability, and IEPs focus on special education interventions. So, for example, a pull-out program or an aid. How these might look depend on the needs of the child and the particular policies of the school district. Getting an IEP or 504 can be challenging, and if that's something you're interested in exploring, I encourage you to reach out to your child's school counselor, and again, a therapist may be able to help you navigate that. Although most likely you'll need a thorough assessment by a neuropsychologist. Sometimes master's level counselors or social workers are trained to do this work, but most often it's a doctoral level psychologist. And if the school agrees that your child needs a diagnosis, then they should be the ones to pay for it, which is why you should reach out to your school counselor. I'll be doing a future episode about working with your child's school that will go into this in more detail. But for now, I want you to know that there may be options that can keep your child in school even if they have a social anxiety disorder, separation anxiety disorder, or school refusal. Now back to homeschooling. It may be that the anxiety is not the primary issue, or at least not the only issue that's leading you to consider home education, and it may be the right choice for your family. Maybe it's not about avoidance, but creating a better experience for your child. It may be that your school options just aren't a good fit for other reasons. You may not like the culture of the school, or you may want to travel during the school year, or you just want your child to do something different. Those things might be what is bringing you to homeschooling, and your child's anxiety may just be part of it. In that case, I encourage you to consider what your child might need in their home education experience in order to support them in learning to manage and grow through their anxiety. Remember, anxiety is about avoidance, so anxiety treatment is about confrontation. That doesn't mean you're going to take your socially anxious child and enroll them in Toastmasters, that program for public speaking. But you do need to look for social opportunities and opportunities for them to separate from you and learn to be around other people. Fortunately, many communities have options and resources for homeschooling families. Rec centers and libraries may offer classes. There are group tutoring programs. Churches, mosques, and synagogues have activities for young children and teens. Or you might look for a social skills group through an occupational therapist or counseling practice. You can also look locally for homeschool co-ops. Connecting with local families on Facebook or other social media may help you find those resources. And programs like 4-H, Girl Scouts, Junior Achievement, or Little League are open to homeschool students. Homeschooling is a lot of work for parents, and while it can be a wonderful gift for kids, there may be other more appropriate answers for the child who's struggling to stay in school because of anxiety. I welcome your thoughts and questions on this topic. Reach out if you have something to share or something to ask. See you next week. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. If you have a question you would like me to answer on the show, please go to childanxietysupport.com/FAQ. And if you'd like to learn more about the Child Anxiety Support membership, please go to childanxietysupport.com. The membership offers courses, live events, and community to help you design a personalized program to free your family from the trap of child anxiety. I hope you'll consider subscribing to the podcast and sharing it with any friends or family who you think might find it helpful. You can get more of my child anxiety content over at Instagram, where I'm Dawn Friedman, MSED, or on Facebook at the Child Anxiety Support page. Thanks again, and have a great week.